She woke up alone after the most unforgettable night of her life. No name, no note, just silence. 7 years later, he walks into her diner, wearing a wedding ring, calling her by the name she buried. But when their daughter calls him stranger, the past threatens to explode. What did he forget, and what was stolen from them both? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart? Hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The wind screamed through the cliffs like it was mourning something lost. Rain slammed down in sheets as Ivy stumbled along the highway's shoulder, soaked through, her backpack clutched to her chest like it held her soul. She had no plan, only a gut instinct to get away. Away from the foster home with locks on every door but none on the lies. Away from the leering stepbrother, the silence of adults who looked the other way, and the years of being invisible in rooms she never chose to. Her thumb had barely been out 5 minutes when headlights cut through the storm. The truck swerved but stopped. The man inside didn't ask questions, he just leaned over, unlocked the door, and nodded. She climbed in. His name was Jack. That's all he gave her. No last name, no small talk. Just silence and the occasional glance, his eyes a storm of their own. They didn't make it far before the road closed due to a fallen tree. With no signal and worsening weather, Jack pointed toward an old cabin tucked into the woods. Ivy followed him through the mud, both of them slipping, both of them laughing without meaning to. Inside, the fireplace fought back the cold. Ivy wrapped herself in an old blanket while Jack lit candles. His movements were quiet, deliberate. He moved like a man used to solitude, a man who'd learned to survive by shutting everything out. They didn't mean to talk, but words slipped out in the way they sometimes do when you're too tired to hold them back. He told her he'd been in a car accident, someone died, someone close. Since then, he hadn't slept properly, hadn't felt anything but guilt and numbness. She didn't press, she just nodded. She understood what it meant to live with ghosts. She told him about foster homes, about moving every year, about teachers who stopped learning her name, about the first boy who hurt her and the last one who tried. She didn't cry when she said it. She just stared into the fire and felt his gaze on her like warmth. Then, silence again, but this time it felt safe. And somewhere between candlelight and dawn, Ivy leaned forward. Just a breath, just a question without words. And Jack didn't pull away. They didn't undress each other with desperation, but reverence, like neither of them expected to be touched gently again. Later, when Ivy fell asleep, her head on his chest and her hand against his heartbeat, she didn't dream of running for once. She dreamed of roots. The smell of coffee woke her. The storm had passed, leaving dew on the window panes and a soft gray light filtering in. Ivy smiled sleepily as she stretched, the blanket still warm with the memory of him. But the cabin was silent. She sat up. No footsteps, no creaking wood, just the echo of absence. His jacket was gone, the truck keys were missing. So was he. There was no note, no phone number, not even his last name scrawled on a napkin. Ivy stood at the window, her hand on the glass. She waited another hour, then 2, but Jack didn't come back. And just like that, he became another ghost in her life, another person who'd held her heart for a moment and vanished before it could mean something more. 7 years later, Ivy worked the early shift at a seaside diner in a sleepy Oregon town. Her hair was pulled back, her apron stained with syrup and life. She had a son now, Elijah, 5 years old, obsessed with jellyfish and the light of her every day. She didn't speak of Jack, not even to herself. That morning, the sky was slate blue and the waves rolled gentle. Ivy was refilling salt shakers when a black SUV pulled up outside. She didn't think much of it until the bell over the door rang. He walked in. Same jaw, same stride, same storm in his eyes. But this time, he wore a tailored suit and a wedding band. And he didn't say hi. He didn't ask for a menu. He looked straight at her and whispered, Ivy? The ceramic coffee pot slipped from her hands and shattered against the tile. The diner fell silent. She didn't move, couldn't breathe. Mr. Whitmore, that's what the hostess called him as she rushed to mop up the spill. A name Ivy had never heard. But Ivy was already frozen in time. Jack hadn't vanished, he'd just become someone else. And now, he stood in her world again, 7 years too late. Looking at her like he remembered everything. But she could tell by the confusion in his eyes he didn't know. Not yet. Not about Elijah. And about the letter she wrote and never got to send. And about the night that changed her, even after he forgot. And not about the name she never stopped whispering in her sleep. Ivy's hands trembled as she wiped the counter, trying to recover from the moment. The broken coffee pot had been swept up. Customers had returned to their hash browns and morning newspapers, but Ivy's heart was still shattered in pieces, just like the porcelain. She didn't dare look again, but she could feel his gaze. He had taken a booth in the corner, close enough to watch, far enough to act like a stranger. And maybe he was one now. She brought over a menu without making eye contact. Coffee? He nodded. Black. His voice hadn't changed, but everything else had. The beard was gone, the rugged edge replaced by boardroom polish. His hand still steady, still large with the nose. What brings you to Edgewater? She asked, tone clipped. Passing through, he said too casually. Business deal nearby. She didn't reply, just poured his coffee and walked away. But he didn't stop watching her, and when Ivy returned to the kitchen window, she saw it, his gaze fixed on the photo pinned to the side of the service hatch. Her son, Noah, 6 years old, wide-eyed, dark-haired, with a crooked little smile. Ivy's breath caught in her chest. That photo had been there for months, but now it felt like a loaded weapon. She turned sharply, marched to his booth, and whispered through clenched teeth, "Whatever name you go by now, I'm not that girl anymore. You had your night, you don't get a lifetime." He blinked. "Ivy, I didn't—" "Don't," she snapped. "Don't pretend. You left, no note, no explanation." She turned and walked off, heart pounding so hard she couldn't hear the customer orders behind her. At night, in the quiet of her apartment, Ivy sat on her bed, staring at Noah as he slept. His tiny fingers clutched a stuffed lion, the same one she'd picked up the day she found out about him. 7 years ago, alone in a clinic in a town she barely remembered, she had seen the sonograph flicker and felt a pulse of something that wasn't fear. For once, she could have chased Jack down. She could have waited at that cabin, but she hadn't. Instead, she chose to be a mother, and to never chase ghosts. The next day was overcast, the sea air heavier than usual. Ivy moved slower than normal, her thoughts scrambled and aching. And then he walked in again. But this time, no ring. She caught the flag of his bare finger as he sat in the same booth. Her stomach turned. "Coffee today?" she asked, standing over him with arms crossed. He looked up, quiet. "No." "Then why are you here?" He hesitated. Then, "Because you're here." Ivy gritted her teeth. "You don't get to say things like that." News, she cut in, voice low and sharp. "I want answers, real ones." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "My name is Jonathan Whitmore. Back then, I wasn't using my name. I was running from it." She narrowed her eyes. He continued, "I'd just found out my family business had ties to something illegal. My brother was in trouble. I took the fall publicly to get him out of the country. I changed my name, disappeared." "Me," Ivy whispered. Jonathan swallowed. "That night, I thought I had nothing left. But you were safe, real. So I stayed. For one night. I woke up and knew I'd just endangered you." "It's convenient," Ivy spat. "Disappearing to protect me? Left you because men were following me. I couldn't risk them finding you. You didn't deserve the mess I was in." Ivy crossed her arms. "I didn't deserve silence either." He didn't answer, just stared at the table. That's when it happened. The corner of her eye caught it, A sleek black car parked across the street. Its windows were tinted, but the moment was too perfect, too still. Then, the driver's side headlight flashed. Ivy's blood turned to ice. She grabbed her apron, ran to the back room, and burst into the kitchen. Noah was coloring at the employee table with crayons and toast. She scooped him into her arms. "Mommy?" he asked. "We're going home," she said. She stormed through the diner and yanked the blinds down across every window as she passed. The customers blinked, startled. Jonathan stood, frozen. Ivy didn't look back. He followed her out the rear exit, where she buckled Noah into her car. "What's going on?" "You tell me," she said, "because that car's been out there too long, and now it's flashing lights like it's sending a message." Jonathan glanced down the alley, eyes darkening. "That's not one of mine," he said, "but it might be one of theirs." "Whose?" she asked. He looked at Noah, then at her. "Think we both need to talk, somewhere safer." Ivy stood in the center of her small living room, arms folded tight across her chest, as rain tapped the windows like an impatient visitor. Jonathan paced just a few steps away, wet from the downpour, still catching his breath from rushing after her. She didn't care if he was soaked. She cared that her life had been upended in 48 hours, and the man responsible stood in her home with no right to be there. "Start talking," she said. "Everything." Jonathan met her eyes, but she could see the storm inside him too. Guilt, exhaustion, buried grief. My real name is Jonathan Whitmore. My father is Lawrence Whitmore." Ivy blinked. The name hit like a thunderclap. Everyone knew that name. Real estate mogul, billionaire kingmaker, ruthless. Jonathan continued. "My whole life was scripted. Where I went to school, who I dated, even the woman I was supposed to marry. I followed every command until the year I met you." Ivy didn't interrupt. Her fingers dug into her arms, nails pressing skin. He went on. "When I crashed my car that winter and found that cabin, it was the first time in years I had no one watching me, no one giving orders. That night with you was the only thing I chose for myself." Ivy's throat tightened. "I left because I had to. My father had people watching me. When I didn't report in, they tracked me. I knew if they found you, they'd destroy you to punish me. So I disappeared. But I never stopped thinking about that night." She let his words hang between them. The clock ticked. Rain fell harder, and then, with slow certainty, Ivy turned toward the photo on her mantle. A crayon drawing of a boy and a woman, hand in hand. She didn't look at Jonathan as she said it. "His name is Noah." He stilled. "Noah. 6 years old. He likes peanut butter more than jelly. He hates green socks, and he's yours." The silence that followed felt endless. Jonathan stepped back, his knees nearly giving. He reached for the edge of the couch and sat down slowly. "My father," his voice cracked. Ivy crossed her arms tighter. "You were never supposed to know. I didn't want your name. I didn't want your money. I just wanted peace." Jonathan looked up, raw. "Can I see him?" Her answer was ice. "You don't get to walk in and play hero. You left. Whatever the reason, you left." Jonathan's shoulders sagged. "I didn't even know he existed." "It doesn't change the past," she whispered, "and it doesn't fix it." Before either could say more, the sound of gravel crunching outside made Ivy's head snap toward the window. She peeked between the blinds and froze. Her car tires had been slashed. She ran outside, barefoot, and stared in disbelief. Deep, deliberate gashes across all 4 wheels. Not random vandalism. Someone had sent a message. Jonathan ran out behind her. "What is it?" She pointed. "That wasn't there an hour ago." He cursed under his breath. "I was afraid of this?" "What do you mean?" He turned to her, eyes sharp. "My father must traced me here. He's been keeping tabs on me for years. I dropped off the map, but the moment I reappeared..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. They went back inside quickly. Ivy checked on Noah, still asleep, curled under his blanket. Kind of house, Jonathan said quietly. Outside of town, unlisted, monitored. We'll go tomorrow, just for the weekend. Ivy hesitated. Please, he added, I know you don't trust me, but trust this, my father doesn't care who he hurts. Her eyes went to her son, and slowly, reluctantly, she nodded. The drive to the safe house was quiet. Noah hummed in the back seat, looking out the window as the rain gave way to sunbeams slicing through the clouds. Ivy sat tense in the front passenger seat, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Jonathan drove with careful attention, occasionally glancing at her, but saying nothing unless she asked. The house sat tucked into a forest clearing, modern but modest. Security cameras lined the driveway, a tall gate sealed behind them. Inside, it was warm, clean, silent. Noah explored instantly, bouncing between rooms. He found a bookcase and lit up. "Marmy books," he shouted. Ivy smiled faintly, but didn't move. Jonathan gave her space. He opened the fridge, pulled out juice boxes and sandwiches. "He's welcome to anything. You both are." Later that evening, after a quiet dinner, Ivy sat by the window with a blanket around her. She was staring into the trees when she heard small footsteps approach. It was Noah, holding a book. He walked past her, right to Jonathan. "Can you read this?" he asked shyly, lifting the cover toward him. Jonathan froze. The book was worn, the edges dog-eared. A story about a small boy who builds a treehouse for his mom. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Sure. Let's sit." Noah curled into his lap. Ivy didn't move from the window, but she turned slightly to watch. Jonathan opened the cover. "Once upon a time," he began, voice steady at first, "there was a little boy with a big heart." Noah smiled. "That's me." Jonathan's voice trembled. Ivy's throat closed up. He continued reading, stumbling once or twice, but finishing the book as Noah leaned into his shoulder. When the story ended, Noah turned and whispered, "You read better than Mommy." Jonathan laughed softly. "Don't tell her that." "I heard that," Ivy called gently. Noah giggled and climbed down, heading for the guest room where his blanket and toys waited. Jonathan stayed on the couch, eyes fixed on the book still in his hand. Ivy walked over, knelt beside the coffee table, and picked up the book's cover. "I bought that for him on his 2nd birthday. He wouldn't sleep unless I read it 3 times. Jonathan smiled faintly. "He's incredible." Hearing her say it, he met her eyes. "I don't know what comes next," he said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness or anything, but being here tonight, reading to him, it reminded me what I missed, and what I can't walk away from again." Ivy looked at the book in his hands, then up at the man she once knew as Jack. "This weekend doesn't mean I trust you," she said. "I know. It means I want to believe in something again." Jonathan nodded. And in the soft quiet of the safe house, 2 people sat in a room built by secrets, stitched together by storms, and lit with the first fragile spark of something like hope. The safe house was quiet except for the soft hum of a ceiling fan and the rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. Ivy had just finished folding Noah's laundry when she noticed Jonathan's briefcase sitting half-open on the desk in the study. Curiosity tugged at her like a whisper. Something about the way he had avoided eye contact that morning made her chest. She approached it slowly, each step a battle between restraint and the need to know. Her fingers hovered, then gently parted the flap. Inside, neatly stacked folders and documents peeked out. On top was a thick file marked "Confidential." Beneath that, a thinner one, labeled simply, "Ivy?" She pulled the folder out. Her breath caught. A photograph slipped from the side and floated to the floor. Ivy stooped to pick it up. It was her, pregnant, standing outside a tiny grocery store with one hand over her belly. The angle suggested it was taken from a distance, perhaps from a car window. Her knees nearly buckled. Jonathan had known. She clutched the photo tightly and opened the folder. Inside were several sheets, her work record from the diner, a school registration form for Noah, even medical receipts. But what made her hands shake were the divorce papers tucked beneath. His name at the top, Jonathan Whitmore. And his wife? She stood there, stunned, until the soft creak of the study door made her spin. Jonathan stood in the doorway, caught. "You knew," she said, her voice trembling. She held up the photo. "You knew about us." He looked down, ashamed. "Not right away. I only found out 2 years ago. I tried to come back then, but I didn't know how. Every time I got close, fear took over. I thought I'd already done too much damage." Her eyes burned. "So instead, you watched from a distance? You had someone take this? You let me believe you vanished." Jonathan stepped forward. "I never stopped looking for you. The photo wasn't surveillance. A friend of mine in private security tracked you when I asked. I needed to know you were okay." Helplessly, "You had a wife?" she spat, pointing at the papers. "A marriage arranged by my father," he said. "I didn't love her. I left her months ago. The papers are waiting because I wanted to tell you in person." She shook her head, tears pooling. "This is manipulation. I let my guard down, and here you are pulling strings again." And whispered, "I just wanted to protect you. I always did. I always did. I know I failed then, but I'm here now." Before she could respond, a loud cough echoed down the hallway. Ivy rushed out to find Noah, sitting on the couch, cheeks flushed and forehead damp with sweat. "He was fine earlier," she whispered, heart pounding. "Now he's burning up." Jonathan moved quickly. "There's a private clinic 10 minutes away. I have a doctor on call." Ivy hesitated. "Let me help," he said, already grabbing his keys. "Please." They drove in silence. At the clinic, Jonathan stayed by Noah's side while the doctor checked his vitals. Ivy sat on the edge of the chair, hands clenched. "The fever was just a virus," they said. "Nothing serious. He needed fluids and rest." In the corner of the room, Ivy began to hum, the same tune she'd hummed 7 years ago in a firelit cabin. Jonathan closed his eyes, recognizing it instantly. The lullaby. She glanced over and caught him staring. Neither of them said a word, but something passed between them, a quiet thread of memory too fragile to break. Morning sunlight filtered through the windows of the safe house, casting a soft glow across the hardwood floors. Ivy sat by the kitchen table, the old journal still open in front of her. Her fingertips lingered over the pressed flower, faded but intact. A tiny forget-me. The irony made her stomach tighten. Jonathan stepped in with 2 cups of tea, placing one in front of her without a word. He didn't sit, he just watched her in silence, unsure if he'd be welcome in her space again. Ivy glanced up but said nothing. "Remember that flower?" he finally spoke. "You tucked it behind your ear. You said it made you feel like the version of yourself you wished you could be." Ivy stared at him, stunned that he remembered something so specific. Her defenses faltered, but she quickly masked it. "It didn't survive. Neither did we." He nodded, accepting the sting without protest. Noah stirred upstairs, coughing lightly. Ivy bolted from her chair and rushed up. Jonathan followed. They found Noah sitting up, his cheeks flushed and breath shallow. Panic gripped Ivy's chest. "Take him to the hospital," she said, frantic. "Now." Within minutes, Jonathan had them in his car. They arrived at a private pediatric clinic, where the staff ushered Noah in without hesitation. No waiting, no paperwork. Ivy stood frozen, watching nurses move swiftly, realizing this was a world she had never accessed on her own. Jonathan stepped beside her. "They'll take care of him. I made sure they're the best." Ivy turned to him, trembling. "Don't you dare use money to fix what can't be fixed." "I'm not," he said gently. "I'm just trying to help our son." She didn't correct him. When the doctor emerged with a reassuring smile, just a mild respiratory infection, Ivy let out a shaky breath and finally collapsed into a chair. As they waited for Noah to finish his treatment, Ivy softly hummed to herself, instinctively soothing her own nerves. Jonathan tilted his head. It was the same lullaby from the cabin, the one she sang while tracing the scars on his wrist, the one he hadn't heard in 7 years. "She still hummed that," he whispered, sitting beside her. She turned away. "It's the only thing that got him to sleep when he was little." Jonathan nodded, swallowing hard. He's got your eyes. It's your stubbornness, she replied without thinking, then regretted the trace of affection in her voice. Later that night, back at the safe house, Ivy tucked Noah into bed. He clutched his favorite stuffed tiger and blinked sleepily up at her. "Is Mr. Jack my dad?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. Ivy froze, her heart pounded. She opened her mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she kissed his forehead. "Sleep, baby." In her room, she opened the journal again. The dried flower trembled between the pages as if echoing her heartbeat. She scanned her own writing from years ago, pages of longing, heartbreak, and questions that had never found answers. Outside her door, Jonathan lingered, one hand resting on the frame. He heard her weeping softly and stepped back, giving her space. The past was no longer a distant memory. It was alive in the room between them, in every glance, every silence, every scar that never quite faded. And tomorrow, it would demand a choice. Jonathan sat alone in the study of the safe house, flipping through the documents his private investigator had compiled. The file was thicker than he expected. His fingers paused on one page, an old intake form from a state foster care agency. The name at the top wasn't Ivy. It was Evelyn Grayson. His breath caught. Grayson. He dug deeper, pages rustling in quick succession, until he found what he was afraid to find. A scanned news article from a decade ago. Elizabeth Grayson, former ethics officer at Whitmore Industries, fired amid stormy gray eyes and a jawline too familiar. His father's signature was all over this. He hadn't just buried Jonathan's past with Ivy, he'd buried Ivy's identity to protect his empire. Jonathan leaned back, numb. He had known his father was ruthless, but this was surgical, targeted, personal. He waited until the next morning to speak to Ivy. She was outside, watching Noah play in the grass with a paper boat they had folded together. The boy's laughter floated through the air like a promise. "I need to show you something," Jonathan said quietly, handing her the folder. Ivy flipped through the first few pages, then stopped. Her hand trembled. "How did you get this?" "If I had someone look into you, I didn't expect what I found." Her eyes flicked up, cautious, defensive. "So now you know everything." "I know your mother tried to expose my father." She snapped. "She lost everything because of it. We were homeless for a while, and when she died, the state erased me too." Jonathan's voice cracked. "He did this. He didn't just take you from me. He took your name." She nodded slowly. "And I survived anyway." They stood there, years and grief collapsing between them. "I signed them," Jonathan said, reaching into his coat pocket. She looked down at the envelope. Divorce papers. His ring was no longer on his finger. "I want to start again, with truth. Nothing else." She didn't take the papers right away. Her gaze softened. "Truth doesn't undo the past," he said, "but it can give us a future." Later that week, Ivy agreed to let Noah spend more time with Jonathan, under her supervision. It was cautious, deliberate, but a step nonetheless. Noah took to him quickly. At the dining table, they built model ships together, piece by piece. Jonathan showed him how to steady the tiny sail with tweezers. Noah beamed up at him. "You're good at this." A great effort to keep smiling. "Though I was terrible at first." Noah giggled. "I'm better than you already." Jonathan laughed, feeling a strange warmth settle into his chest. He didn't just see his son, he saw a version of himself that had never gotten to grow freely. And Ivy, he saw the strength she carried alone for years. That afternoon, Ivy returned to the diner for a few hours. It was quiet, mostly locals sipping coffee. She was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door rang. She turned and froze. A tall man in a weathered coat approached the counter. His dark eyes scanned her, then softened with recognition. "Eve?" Only one person had ever called her that. Rafe, her old foster brother, the last tie to her childhood. He leaned in. "You're in trouble." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Jonathan's father. He has eyes on you again. Cameras, trackers, maybe more. I heard it from someone who owed me a favor. Ivy's hand tightened around the cloth in her hand. I can't do this again. I can't lose everything again. You need to run, Rafe said. But this time, she wasn't alone. Ivy drove back to the safe house in silence, the tires humming beneath her like a warning drumbeat. In the back seat, Noah was asleep, clutching the little paper boat Jonathan had helped him fold. Her mind was racing. Rafe's words echoed in her head. They're watching again. She parked, sat for a long minute, and then climbed out. The air was thick with uncertainty. She wasn't afraid for herself. She had been living with fear for most of her life. But Noah? She wouldn't let him be a pawn in anyone's legacy war. Inside, she found Jonathan in the kitchen, rinsing off paintbrushes from a craft session with Noah. He turned, surprised by her expression. And woke herself 2 hours later. Jonathan's smile faded. Rafe? Foster brother. He says your father's watching again. Cameras, surveillance. Maybe worse. Jonathan placed the brush down slowly, then walked toward her. I told you I would protect you. I meant it. Don't make promises you can't keep, she said, voice tight. He didn't flinch. I'm not my father, Ivy. But his reach is long. They sat in the living room, the fire low and flickering. Ivy stared into it like it might hold a path forward. There was a time I thought disappearing was the only answer. That if I just stayed small, he'd never find me. Jonathan watched her carefully. And now? I'm tired of hiding. He exhaled, a deep relief. Then don't. Her eyes shifted to him. But what does that mean for us? Jonathan leaned forward. It means we stand still. We fight, not flee. Ivy wasn't convinced, but she was also tired of running. The next day, Ivy stood at the edge of the estate garden, watching Noah chase butterflies through patches of wild lavender. She hadn't even known he liked flowers until now. Maybe she hadn't given him enough space to explore the world. Maybe she'd been too focused on survival to let him bloom. Jonathan joined her. Do you remember the name you wrote on the cabin wall that night? He asked, softly. She turned, surprised. You saw it? I went back after you left. It was fading, but I could still read it. Evelyn G. She looked down, biting the inside of her cheek. I thought if I wrote it somewhere, it would matter, that someone might remember who I used to be. Remember now, he said, and I want the world to know your name, not the one the system gave you, the one they tried to bury. She hesitated, then reached into her back pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. Inside it was her mother's old signature, pressed in blue ink. For Noah, Ivy whispered. For Noah, so he knows where he comes from. Jonathan took her hand. I'd stand beside you, for all of it. Later that evening, they returned to the house to find Noah asleep on the couch. Ivy bent down, gently sliding it out from under his fingers. It was an old picture of her mother, one she hadn't even realized Noah had seen. Scrawled in crayon on a piece of paper beside it were the words, Noah Grayson Whitmore. She pressed a hand to her heart. Jonathan stood behind her. He's already rewriting the legacy. Ivy smiled through the tears in her eyes. Maybe it's time we helped him finish it. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She felt like she was walking toward it, toward truth, toward healing, toward the name she hid, and the family she never thought she'd have. The morning sun poured gently through the cracked blinds of the safe house kitchen, where Ivy stood folding Noah's hoodie. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear this time, but from uncertainty. She glanced at the clock, then to the envelope she had been staring at for an hour. Her resignation letter. The diner had been more than a job. It had been her shelter, her rhythm, her way to feel in control when everything else had crumbled. But now, everything was shifting. She walked in that afternoon, hair tied back, heart racing. Her boss, a kind man named Earl with grease-stained hands and a booming laugh, looked up from the register. Peavy, he said with a warm smile. Didn't think I'd see you today. She handed him the envelope. I think it's time I step back. He didn't even open it, just looked at her and shook his head. You still belong here, Earl said softly. This place ain't just about pancakes and tips. It's about people who show up. And honey, you always did. Tears burned behind her eyes. Thank you, Earl, but I think I need to figure out where I belong now. Earl patted her shoulder. Then don't call it quitting, call it a pause. She left the diner with her head high and heart full. That evening, Jonathan picked her and Noah up in a borrowed truck. Ivy noticed the tension in his shoulders melt as he watched Noah in the rearview mirror, chattering about clouds and kites. He looked like a man trying to memorize a moment he never thought he'd have. He drove them 2 hours north to a quiet vineyard nestled in the hills. Ashvine, he called it. Once belonging to his mother, now long abandoned after her death. Weeds danced in the wind, but the bones of the vineyard were still beautiful. Aged brick walls, crumbling trellises, and a rooftop that overlooked miles of golden green. Jonathan parked beneath a flowering fig tree. This was her favorite place, he said, and it's the only place that ever felt like home to me. Ivy helped Noah out of the truck, her eyes scanning the landscape with a strange comfort. As the sun dipped, Jonathan led them to the rooftop. It was decorated with string lights and weather-worn furniture, cushions dusted off and waiting. In the center sat a blanket, a thermos of cocoa, and a toy telescope. Noah rushed to it, giggling as he pointed the plastic lens toward the stars. "Mom, I see Jupiter!" Ivy laughed, then turned to find Jonathan holding 2 mugs. "They say you can't see the stars in the city," he said, "but here, it's like they finally show up for you." She took the mug, fingers brushing his. For a long time they stood in silence, just listening to the wind and Noah's happy murmurs. Then, slowly, Jonathan took her hand. "I'm not here to ask you to forgive everything," he said, voice trembling. "What happened, what I let happen, broke something, in both of us. But I'd give anything to start again. Not to fix the past, but to write a new story." Ivy looked down at their hands, hers scarred and callous from years of work, his steady and warm. She didn't know what to say. Then he dropped to one knee. Her breath caught. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside was a simple ring, a silver band etched with delicate vines. But what made Ivy gasp wasn't the jewel. It was the engraving inside. "To the girl in the storm." She covered her mouth. "You remembered?" Jonathan looked up at her, eyes full of hope. "I never forgot." And just then, a small tug at her dress. "Noah?" "Mom," he said softly, "can he stay for breakfast tomorrow?" Ivy's heart broke open in a way that felt like healing. She knelt down, kissed Noah's head, and looked back at Jonathan, the man who had once been a ghost, now real in every way. "Breakfast at a time," she whispered. Jonathan stood and pulled her close. "It's all I ever wanted," he whispered back. That night, for the first time in 7 years, Ivy slept soundly, not in fear, but in something that almost felt like peace. The next morning began with soft laughter and the scent of toasted bread wafting through the air. Ivy stirred to the muffled sound of Noah giggling downstairs. She wrapped herself in the oversized knit sweater Jonathan had left on the chair and made her way toward the kitchen of the vineyard house. There, she paused in the doorway. Jonathan stood at the stove, comically flipping pancakes with one hand, while Noah perched on the counter beside him, pretending to take breakfast orders, with a notepad and a pen that didn't work. Jonathan had flour on his cheek, and the pancake looked more like a squashed omelette than anything, but the joy was real. Noah spotted her and waved. "Mom, we're making a pancake castle." Jonathan turned, eyes crinkling with a grin. "We may need emergency syrup." Ivy leaned against the doorframe, her heart full and aching. The image was too perfect, too fleeting. After breakfast, they ventured outside. Ivy watched Noah run between the vines, laughter echoing. Jonathan walked beside her, hands in his pockets, quietly. "There's more I need to tell you," he said at last, "about my father. About why I stayed away longer than I should have." Ivy nodded. "I'm listening." He stopped and turned to her. "My father knew about you before I even came back. I don't know how, but he had someone watching you. After I found the photo in the briefcase of you pregnant, I confronted him. He told me walking away was the best thing I could do for you, that I was a threat. Ivy's fists clenched. You let him decide that? Jonathan looked away. At the time, I wasn't strong enough to fight him, but I am now. She studied him. The man before her was still Jack, the quiet soul who'd made her laugh beside a fireplace years ago. But he was also someone who'd been rebuilt through grief, shame, and a desperate need to make things right. You have a second chance, she said. Not just with me, with your own story. What are you going to do with it? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I'm selling my shares in Whitmore Holdings. I've spoken with my attorneys. I don't want any of it if it means dragging you and Noah into that legacy. Ivy blinked. You'd walk away from your entire fortune? He smiled. I'd walk toward peace and toward the two people who made me remember who I am. Tears welled in her eyes. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Noah asked if they could all plant something, so we'll always have a memory here. Together, they dug a shallow patch of soil near the vineyard's entrance. Ivy handed Noah a rose cutting. He placed it in the earth with care. Should we name it? He asked. Jonathan crouched beside him. How about the second chance rose? Ivy whispered. Or the storm flower, something that blooms after the rain. They nodded in agreement. Jonathan rose, brushing soil from his jeans. I'm not rushing you. I know trust takes time, but I want you to know, if you ever say yes, if there's ever a day when you feel ready. She looked up, locking eyes with him. I'll still be waiting with the ring, he said softly. Not to fix the past, but to honor the future. Ivy stepped close. And I'll still be the girl from the storm, but maybe now, I'm not standing in the rain alone. They didn't kiss, not yet, but their hands intertwined as if they already had. And that night, under stars and quiet winds, they began again, not with promises, but with presence. The morning paper arrived with a quiet knock, the headlines screaming louder than any voice could. Ivy stood at the porch with her hands trembling, reading the bold black text. Whitmore will exclude illegitimate heirs scandal in the Empire. Her stomach sank. She didn't need to read the full article to know what it meant. The clause in Jonathan's father's will, now public, branded Noah as illegitimate. Her son, her light, reduced to a legal technicality. Jonathan found her standing still, the paper pressed against her chest like a wound. But this was going to be private, he said quietly, eyes dark with remorse. It doesn't matter, Ivy replied. Let them write what they want. Jonathan reached for the paper, crumpled it, and tossed it aside. It does matter. He tried to write Noah out of history. We're not letting him win. Evening they sat together at the old kitchen table of the vineyard house, a notebook between them. Ivy tapped her pen on the edge, thinking. She had always hated the spotlight, but this wasn't about attention. It was about voice. I want to do something, she said finally. Not out of anger, but out of defiance and dignity. Jonathan listened as she outlined her idea, a foundation in honor of every woman who'd been erased, silenced, discarded by powerful men who pretended their stories didn't matter. She looked at him. We name it the Grayson Whitmore Foundation, not because of your father, but because of our mothers. Mine who never got to raise me, and yours who never got to protect you. Jonathan reached for her hand, nodding, Let's rewrite the legacy. They drafted the letter to the press together. Every word was deliberate. Ivy insisted they not respond to the scandal with defense, but with purpose. The letter read, In the light of recent revelations, we choose not to focus on the exclusion written into one man's will, but on the inclusion we write into our future. The Grayson Whitmore Foundation will serve single parents, silenced voices, and children born into circumstances beyond their control. We are not heirs of a fortune, we are carriers of a legacy, of truth, courage, and love. The press responded with surprise, most expected bitterness. What they got was bold compassion. Within days, Ivy was invited to speak at a local shelter. She almost said no. Her voice wasn't strong, she told herself. She wasn't a speaker. but Noah tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "I'll sit in the front row." And he did, wearing a little blue vest and swinging his feet in the front chair, while Ivy stood under the hum of flickering lights. Her voice shook when she began. "My name is Ivy Grayson. I was raised by a system that never let me choose my name. I became a mother at 19. I used to think being invisible was how I survived, but now I know being seen is how we begin to heal." Noah clapped first, the rest followed. After the speech, a young mother approached her. "I thought I was alone," she said softly. "Thank you for saying it out loud." Ivy squeezed her hand. "You're not alone. None of us are." Back at the vineyard, Jonathan was already moving forward. Without announcing it, he sold a portion of his inherited shares. Quietly, deliberately. He wanted no credit, just momentum. Excitedly, Ivy sighed, hoping to see him soon. Alidia smiled, her brow instantly opening. "I need space at the table that matters." She looked at him, with something different in her eyes this time. Not just love, but belief. He had meant what he said that night under the fairy lights. He was rewriting his story. Not in ink, in action. One crisp morning, Ivy found herself tidying the small desk in the corner of the vineyard kitchen, sorting through Noah's drawings and homework. A folded paper caught her eye, slightly wrinkled, written in pencil. Her fingers hesitated as she unfolded it. At the top it read, "My Hero Essay." The first line made her breath catch. The heat and smoke reached her. She looked at him. How could she abandon? Ivy sat down slowly, her knees weakening beneath the quiet power of those words. Each sentence was simple, written with the honesty only a child could manage. "He reads me stories. He makes pancakes but burns them. Mom laughs when she thinks I'm not looking. I hope we stay like this forever, because now I know I'm not half of something. I'm whole." Tears spilled down Ivy's cheeks as she held the page to her chest. The ache she had carried for so long cracked open, and in its place was something softer, brighter. Outside, in the garden where Noah had planted a row of sunflowers, Jonathan walked out with 2 steaming mugs. He paused at the sight of her, tears streaking her face, the note clutched tight. Without a word, he knelt beside her and set the mugs down. "He didn't let me read it," he said gently. "Said it was private." Ivy managed to laugh through the tears. "It is, but you need to know. You matter to him." Jonathan took her hand. "And you rebuilt me, without even trying." They sat like that for a while, beneath the vines, the wind brushing gently through the leaves. The world didn't need to see this moment. It was theirs. Later that afternoon, Ivy received a call from the shelter director. They wanted her to speak again, this time at a citywide gathering of social workers and single parents. "I'm not a public figure," she said, uncertainty creeping in again. "You're a voice they need to hear," the woman insisted. That night, Ivy stood before a packed hall. Jonathan waited backstairs holding Noah's hand. Her voice didn't shake this time. "Spent years running from who I was," she began. "From the name I was given, from the pain I carried, from the boy I loved who never came back. But what I learned is this. Love isn't a perfect arrival, it's a return. And sometimes, it's not the one who comes back who makes the biggest difference, it's the one who stayed." Thunderous applause followed, but Ivy didn't look at the crowd, she looked at Noah. And he was smiling. Proud, whole. As they walked out under the streetlights, Ivy slipped her fingers into Jonathan's. "We've come far," she whispered. "We're just getting started," he replied. Back at the vineyard, a letter arrived by courier. Not from the press, not from Jonathan's father's estate. It was from a woman in another city, a mother Ivy had never met. It read, "I heard your story. I thought no one like me had a voice. Now I know we do. Thank you." Ivy folded the letter and placed it next to Noah's essay in a small wooden box. "Legacy," she said softly, "isn't what we leave behind, it's what we lift while we're here." The next morning, as the sun warmed the garden, Ivy stood at the window sipping coffee while Jonathan and Noah raced between the sunflowers. She touched the glass, heart full. She had once been a girl left behind in the storm. Now she was the storm's calm, the mother of a boy who believed in heroes, and the woman who finally believed in herself. And for the first time in her life, Ivy didn't feel forgotten. She felt remembered, chosen, and ready for whatever came next. The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, but to Ivy it felt like fresh air. She sat beside Jonathan, her hand resting lightly on the worn wooden table as the clerk called her name. "Ivy Grayson Whitmore," the woman said, her voice clear and steady. Ivy rose slowly. Her heart thudded. It was a name both old and new. Uncle, the mother who had raised her in whispers and memories, and the man who had found her not once, but twice. Jonathan reached for her hand, his grip grounding. "You ready?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I was born ready. I just didn't know it until now." Later that afternoon, the vineyard buzzed gently with the sound of quiet preparation. It wasn't a grand wedding, no chandeliers or polished marble, no guests flown in from far-off cities. Just sun, sky, and the ones who mattered. Ivy stood at the edge of the garden path, barefoot. The earth felt cool beneath her toes. She hadn't worn shoes that night at the cabin either. Something about the dirt beneath her skin made her feel real, rooted, alive. Her dress flowed like wind-washed silk, simple but soft, a pale blush shade that shimmered in the sunlight. Her hair was loosely pinned, a single sprig of lavender tucked behind one ear. Noah stood beside her, gripping the satin pillow with the rings tied delicately at the center. He wore a vest too big for his frame, and a nervous smile that matched his excitement. He looked up at her. "Sure you're not gonna trip, Mom?" he whispered. She leaned down and kissed his temple. "If I do, you'll catch me, right?" "Always," he grinned. Music began, a soft strum of guitar. Ivy looked up. Jonathan stood at the altar in the middle of the garden, his face etched with awe and gratitude. His eyes never left hers as she took the first step forward. Guests turned, some wiped away tears, a few smiled with recognition. The journey these two had walked had left footprints in many hearts. Ivy and Noah reached the arbor, draped in white linen and woven vines. Jonathan bent down and shook Noah's hand solemnly. "You're the best man I've ever had." Noah puffed out his chest. "I know." The ceremony was short, but every word landed with weight. The vows were handwritten. "I don't promise perfection," Jonathan began. "I only promise presence. I lost you once. I won't lose you again. Not to fear, not to silence, not to time." Ivy took his hand. "You didn't just find me again. You reminded me who I was before I was forgotten. You didn't rescue me. You saw me. And that saved me." The officiant smiled gently. "With these words and these rings, we bind this new chapter. A story of returning." Noah handed over the rings, beaming with pride as Ivy slid hers on. When Jonathan whispered, "You're home," her eyes shimmered. The kiss that followed wasn't perfect. Jonathan leaned too far forward and Ivy laughed into his mouth. But it was real, and the applause that followed wasn't polite. It was full-throated and joyful, echoing across the vineyard and into the trees beyond. At the reception, tables were adorned with wildflowers, jars of honey, and linen napkins folded by Ivy and Noah the night before. Laughter floated through the air as friends shared toasts, memories, and too many cupcakes. Jonathan rose at sunset. He lifted his glass and looked around the table. His gaze landed on Ivy, then Noah. "To the woman who reminded me who I was," he said, "and to the boy who taught me who I want to be." Everyone raised their glasses. Ivy blinked back tears. And somewhere in her heart something settled, something long restless finally at peace. The next morning, long after the last sparkler had faded and the vineyard had returned to stillness, Ivy stood barefoot again, this time at the edge of the cliff where the cabin once stood. The old wooden frame was gone, reclaimed by time and storms, but the memory lingered, etched into the earth, carved into her bones. She knelt and placed a smooth stone into the soil. On it, she had written, in faded ink, "Where love began." Jonathan stood a few feet behind her, watching in silence. He didn't interrupt. He knew this moment belonged to her. When she turned around, her eyes found his. She smiled. "Strange," she said. "We spent one night here, and everything else somehow grew from it." He stepped closer. Maybe because the truth was never loud, just rooted. Later that week, back at their seaside cottage, the air was warm with the scent of pancakes and laughter. Ivy stood at the stove, guiding Noah's hands as he poured batter into the pan. He giggled when it sizzled too fast and splattered. "You're a natural," she said, kissing the top of his head. Behind them, in the corner of the room, Jonathan sat on a stool, strumming his guitar. It was a quiet morning, the kind they used to only dream about. Now, it was real. "Can we go back to the cabin someday?" Noah asked, licking syrup from his fingers. Ivy paused, her eyes flicked toward the window, where sunlight pooled across the floor like memory itself. Then she knelt down, so she was eye level with him. "We never left, baby," she said softly. "We just took the long way home." Noah tilted his head. "So, this is home?" She nodded. "This, right here." Jonathan set the guitar down and crossed the room. He wrapped his arms around both of them. The three stood there, a knot of warmth and forgiveness and time. In that silence, Ivy felt it again, that grounding truth. Love hadn't rushed back into her life like a flood. It had tiptoed, stumbled, whispered its way back in, and now? It stayed. Later that day, Ivy opened her journal and wrote the final line in a story she never thought she'd finish. On the last page, in a script softened by years and healing, she wrote, "Love doesn't always return the way it left, but when it finds its way back, it stays." She closed the journal, and for the first time in 7 years, she didn't feel like she was waiting anymore. Together, she was already home, with her son, with the man who remembered her name, and with the legacy of love they would all carry, together, forever.